God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. It means you're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk. And it's interesting when you get into these situations where there's a lot of intellectual horsepower at the table. Some folks feel compelled to talk a lot, and I feel compelled to listen a lot, or at least listen more than I talk. And I think certainly that's an attribute that I try to instill. I don't have all the answers, and so I try to listen, ask questions, and allow others to express their opinions, and then guide the team to the best decision, kind of with the collective input. My leadership style is not a monarchy. I prefer to work in a meritocracy where everybody's contributions and merits are valued, and that's how success is determined, not by being the monarch and making all the decisions.
Hey, I'm Brian Wish, and welcome back to the One Away Show. Today's guest is Dirk Wakeham, a seasoned entrepreneur, private equity leader, and someone who's learned how to grow companies, teams, and himself through the power of honest decision making. Dirk shares the one moment when he chose to walk away from stability to chase something bigger, founding a company, leading a team, and eventually selling that business when he knew it had reached its ceiling. But the conversation doesn't stop at business. We talked about authentic leadership, raising resilient teams, making hard choices on the home front, and what it means to evolve after personal loss. Dirk's blend of humility, insight, and candor makes this one of the most grounded conversations I've ever had. Let's get to it. Dirk, welcome to the One Away Show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Dirk, I've loved brief chats, but there's a great spirit to you, and so I'm excited to dive in today. What's the one away moment that you want to share with us today?
Wow, the one away moment. I guess I'll recall back on my time as an entrepreneur. I had a chance to start a business in 2000. I say start a business. It was sort of a spin out of a company that I had worked for almost 15 years. Decided I wanted to become an entrepreneur and have my own opportunity to, be the marquee on the wall and lead a company and, make my mark in the world. So I structured a deal with that company to build my own software business. They had agreed to put up some capital. I had agreed to go raise some outside capital, and they agreed to become my first customer. So we started the business and, had a pretty good run. It was bumping and bruising a few times, and a couple times we worried about making payroll, but we always ended up figuring out a way to make it happen. About 7 years later, it came time to figure out what the next chapter of that business was. Somebody came along and made us an offer to buy the business, and I knew, we had sort of run our course with the current pace of play, and it was time to hook the cart of the business to a different sponsor, different platform, larger scale, et cetera. And it really became an odd sort of decision point for me where I had a great business. It was providing a great living for me and my family. I knew that I was grateful to that company that I used to work for that was both my investor and my customer. But I also knew that the time was going to be right for us to try to do something much bigger with it. Unfortunately, they had a different opinion. I think they felt like they liked the way and status quo and wanted the business to continue as it was. And I wanted to go off and do something else and make it into a much bigger thing. And so I had to make a decision to effectively get, divorced from them and take my business and my team and lead them into the next chapter. And so it was a one-way moment where, I could have just stayed doing what I was doing and not sort of pursued my dream, and given the people on my team an opportunity to go much bigger and better things as well. But, it was sort of closing one chapter, a little bit of bittersweet, and open up a new chapter.
Sure. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And I want to come back to that. I want to kind of put a pin in that so we can work around it and then bring ourselves to it. So, Dirk, and something I heard you say on a different show or something I read was when you said with the company that you were working with, you saw the opportunity to then go build the business and kind of take your shot at building a company. And something that you spoke to was the fact that if you ever wanted to have freedom or you ever wanted to kind of be able to do something fully on your own, it have to be as an entrepreneur
so you could create that given maybe the limits that you felt on the other side of that. Can you share a little bit more? Like, was entrepreneurship always on the radar for you, or was it something just truly of the necessity with the family and all these aspects to your life at the time?
Yeah, I think I always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial bias. I think back, even as a kid, creating little businesses to sell things. I had a paper route, which I think is a great proxy for, being in business for yourself, even at a 12-year-old kid, right? You're having to perform labor and sell services and collect money and all that stuff. So I always had a little bit of that entrepreneurial hustle. I got caught up a little bit in the employee trap, where, okay, now I'm getting a paycheck. I like the paycheck. I got a family, my kids like, new clothes every school year, and my wife and I like to go out to dinner. And so you become a little bit of a, beholden to the paycheck. And, I always knew I wanted to get back into being an entrepreneur and wanted to sort of do my own thing. And that was for both the financial rewards, but also for just the satisfaction of, kind of controlling your own fate and own destiny. So I think it was always in there. I got sidetracked a little bit, sort of, again, being a slave to the paycheck. One of the things when people ask me, and in fact, one of the fellows that was one of my mentors in that business, that I started, he had a saying. He said, "Dirk, you got to be able to live on," at the time it was like $5,000 a month. Whatever it is, you got to figure out how to get your burn rate down to where you can actually take risks to be an entrepreneur. And I see so many, of course, that was 25 years ago. $5,000 doesn't go very far. When you got a wife and two kids these days. But my point is being able to, in a position to take risks and not get your lifestyle ratcheted up to the point where now you really are stuck, right? You got two big car payments, big house payment, kids, sports, private coaching, all that junk. Those are all great, but at some point it, becomes impractical to go and be an entrepreneur. You got to be able to, you're not going to start your own business and then go pull a salary out of it every month.
Absolutely. I think that's good forethought for entrepreneurs thinking about their next 10 years and how they're going to make lifestyle choices. But you saw it, I think, firsthand, and saying if I want certain things in my life, I'm going to have to maybe change the points in which I'm operating. So
Yeah, maybe change your value system for what you value, right? I mean, at the time, I remember, my wife, we needed to get her a new car, and both of her friends had Cadillac Escalades. The Cadillac Escalade was like the soccer mom vehicle that everybody had to have, where we grew up. And I'm like, we're not buying a Cadillac Escalade. We'll go buy a Chevy Tahoe. It's the same size vehicle. It's kind of built on the same platform. It doesn't have the same fancy stuff, but it's half the cost. And, that was a tough decision that I had to make with my wife at the time and say, look, we're playing a longer game here. And, the Cadillac Escalade is a great vehicle. And I know it's a status symbol, but, it's not the life that, I want to live long-term. I want to play for the next 20 years, not the next 20 months.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing. Live beyond your means, and sounds like some tough conversations on the home front, but it all worked out. So, Dirk, you saw the opportunity with the company that you were with to then go, sounds like, spin out a company. Was that something that you saw specifically? Is that something they brought to you, or like, hey, could you run this? And you said, hey, I could spin this out. Like, how did the formation of that company really take shape at the beginning stages?
Yeah, we had a product that, they had, kind of thought up 15 years before. It was a very manual process. It was all done with paperwork and spreadsheets and a lot of manual. And I sort of saw the web coming. I saw, sort of, online applications, wouldn't call them at the time, but, the webification of things and this ability to sort of, have work centralized and done, in a highly distributed fashion. And so I was able to, kind of conceive this process and take this sort of manual insurance tracking, issuance, billing process and move it to the web. So they had the core of the product, and I had sort of the vision to use the web, which was at the time just barely coming around. I mean, we didn't half the people in the country didn't have internet access at the time, but bring that together into a web-based platform and really make it more efficient, more profitable, and more scalable.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. And then Sounds like they trusted you to say, "Hey, Dirk's our guy to," yeah, you bet on yourself to say, "Yeah, I can go really spin this out and bring a lot of customers to it."
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they had conviction in the product and they had the vision to build Gen 1 of it. And I think I had the vision to sort of build Gen 2 and Gen 3 of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, when you took that company pretty far, but when you got to that point where you started the show and said, "Hey, I got to this point, whether do I keep going, or do I gonna make a transition that might be hard for myself and the people I'm working with, but was ultimately the right decision." Where was the company at the time from where you really took it, to spin out to when you realized, "Hey, I need to kind of maybe let go and kind of put this in different hands." Like, I would love to understand like the size and progression of where things were.
Yeah, it had reached a point where it was a going concern. We had what people now affectionately call product market fit. We had gotten it to a point where we attacked the most the kind of lowest hanging fruit of the market. So we knew the top 50 property owner managers in the country. We could get on an airplane. We were able to sell to them. The problem was is to get the next 250, you needed, a 3x investment in sales and marketing, and that would have taken the company to an unprofitable point. And so it was a little bit of a kind of a catch-22. Good business, going well, but to get it to grow to the next level, it was gonna require, some either material outside capital or an agreement with all investors to take it down to, unprofitable, which was not well received by real estate people who like cash flow. And so that was really what drove it. It was just it had kinda gotten to the point where we were reaching the proverbial glass ceiling. We had to break through it, and that was gonna require, really a rethinking of the business. So when we sold it, took it to RealPage, I had 5 salespeople at the time that were out selling the product. RealPage had 50. So it was easy to then say, "Yeah, we can go attack the rest of the market with the RealPage sales force." And so by hooking our cart to that, it gave us, really material leverage on the go-to-market side of the business. The product was highly scalable. It's just how do you go sell it and open more doors? And they had the ability to go do that for us very efficiently.
Nice. So you felt like you could kind of see like you couldn't take it any further just by the economics of the business, not so much because you couldn't take it, but just because of where the business was and the limitations on what it would take to go to the next level.
That's right. And ironically, that's kind of what, now that I'm working in private equity, that's kind of what we do on a different level, right? We take businesses that maybe have reached a point and we build a thesis to say, if we inject capital and talent into that business, can we take it to a 2x or 3x or 4x the size of where it's at today? We just do it more systematically than, I wasn't thinking about it systematically back then. Now we look at it and you get this pattern recognition. Oh, this is exact parallel to where I was at, 20 years ago. And now we can do the same thing. We put capital in, we can, relieve some current, provide a return for current shareholders, put some cash on the balance sheet and help them take the business to a, 2 or 3 or 4x the size of where it is today.
For sure. That's awesome. And cool that you can kind of do that across companies with your own experience. So when you were at the position of selling leasing desk, and you said you sold it to RealPage, where did that leave you? Right, you would hit this moment in your career. You were looking at something that was next, and what was next for Dirk in that moment?
Well, it was really weird, it's sort of being an employee for most of my life and then being, an entrepreneur. The founder of the business, who I still consider a good friend, he said, "Oh, well, we're gonna have a real good job for you." And I'm like, "Well, that's fine. Well, tell me what the job is and tell me what you're gonna pay me." And he came back and gave me some, explanation that, well, for legal reasons, he couldn't do that because there was this enticement and, we're buying your business and you're coming with it, but we can't really paint you a picture of what we're going to provide you because that'll put us in a regulatory problem because we're incentivizing you to make the decision to vote to sell the business to us. So it was this sort of odd, like I'm selling the business and I've got this belief in myself that I can go add value with the new company, but I didn't really have a deal structured with them at the time
Yeah.
because they couldn't provide me the offer that was, the employment offer and the full economic opportunity for me because they just couldn't do it because of this. I don't know what it's called, but it's some legal term for, where management teams can't be incentivized to sell their business because they're going to, run the risk of a shareholder lawsuit for working in their own self-interest as opposed to the self-interest of the shareholders.
Got it.
Well, I took a little bit of a leap of faith and understood that I believed I could add value and that there was a spot for me at the table of the acquiring company. And so I did have an opportunity. Within days of closing, I had assumed responsibility for not only my business, but another business of equal size in the company that we put together. And so I now had a P&L that was fairly material that I was responsible for with inside RealPage.
So your work in a way doubled, or you had double the numbers, profit line to really take into account. What did that, what I'm curious about is maybe that double the growth in terms of like your responsibilities. Maybe when you look at Leasing Desk and what it required you to grow into and the things that you had to learn to ultimately get the business to where it was, what were some of those things or skills that you had to learn? And as you moved into RealPage and assumed more responsibility, what were the next stages of growth that you ultimately had to level up on to really meet the needs of the business? I know that was a pretty loaded question.
Well, one, I think complexity, right? I mean, RealPage was a business 6 times the size of my business. So it was a very complex business, multi-product, multi-executive. And so just navigating the complexity of a much larger business that was, venture backed, that was, had real professional governance, that had, a real legal department, a real compliance department, real investors, so just learning that level, because I'd worked for basically, lifestyle entrepreneurs for most of my career. So, working in what was the first scale business, I had to learn all of that stuff. Certainly learning to navigate, I don't want to say a political organization, but there were fiefdoms and there were things that were being protected and there was, things that were untouchable, people that were untouchable. And so, having to learn about those things was certainly a nuance for me. And then, just the level of professionalism and reporting and accountability was fairly new to me. Just how do we report out our results? What's the cadence of that? How are we using dashboards for everybody? That was all relatively new. I mean, I had a single product business. It was fairly easy to understand, and now multi-line, multi-P&L, cost allocations, other departments to deal with, not really being fully in charge anymore, where you've now got this sort of matrix organization. Those are all things I had to learn.
Interesting. Yeah, sounds like you were drinking from the fire hose, for sure, and to be able to do that. And Dirk, how many people? So you went from simple, more or less, to from maybe algebra, calc, in a matter of minutes. In terms of the people that were under you and kind of you were responsible for, how did that change and progress from the first business to as you sold into RealPage?
So, RealPage was about a 4x headcount, under my area that I had before. When I took over it was a tenant screening business. So we provided, we did background checks and credit checks for apartment owners to figure out whether people could pay the rent for the apartment they were applying for. So I took over, that division as well as the insurance division we had. So it was really kind of all financial services were rolled into that group. So, a 4x improvement. I think I had 50 people at Leasing Desk. I probably had a couple hundred people in my first year at RealPage.
Interesting. I'm sure, one of the things that we had talked about prior to, the recording is you really looking after the teams, developing teams, holding teams accountable. I'd love to understand, who is Dirk as a leader and manager? Like what does Dirk look like, in an operating environment, and what's important to you as it comes to management and leadership of teams?
Yeah, it's funny. I'll digress a little bit. I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues the other day, and we were debriefing about a board meeting. We had a board meeting yesterday. We were debriefing how the board meeting went. And, I was just saying, I have this saying, it's not mine, it's a quote, I think by Lou Holtz, that said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. It means you're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk. And, it's interesting when you get into these situations where there's a lot of intellectual horsepower at the table. Some folks feel compelled to talk a lot, and I feel compelled to listen a lot, or at least listen more than I talk. And I think, certainly that's an attribute that I try to instill. I don't have all the answers, and so I try to listen, ask questions, and allow others to express their opinions, and then guide the team to the best decision, kind of with the collective input. It's not a um, my leadership style is not a monarchy. I prefer to work in a meritocracy where everybody's contributions and merits are valued, and that's how success is determined, not by being the monarch and making all the decisions.
Yeah, I love that quote, two ears, one mouth. I remember someone told me that in college. Like, I never forget. She was on the track team, speaking of college athletes, and like that was wise. And anyways, so yeah. So, and let me ask you another question on that. Right? What does it take to enable, let me say, a speak up culture, a culture where you can get collective buy-in? It sounds like ultimately you were the decision maker, but it sounds like what you did so well is making people feel empowered to speak and kind of pull from their viewpoints and ultimately make a decision that took that into account. Like, what does that take? And then once you do that well, what changes within an environment of the team dynamics?
Look, I think part of it is people have to feel comfortable taking risks and making mistakes. If they're forever worried that the decision they make is the wrong one and that they're going to get, publicly called out for making a bad decision or reprimanded for making a bad decision, it's not going to work. And so you have to create a culture where, people feel empowered to make decisions and to fail. And look, if you fail 10 times in a row, that's probably a different discussion. But if you make a decision based on the best data that you have and it doesn't work out, that should be celebrated, that you made a decision and you moved on. Um, so I think you're creating that healthy culture where people are allowed to fail. One of the things we talk about is, I spend a lot of time talking about being intellectually honest. And so when we have updates from, when I have one-on-ones, I'll say, hey, give me an update on what's going on. Tell me what's going good and tell me what's going bad. If somebody comes in and they say, well, here's the 10 things that are going great and nothing's going bad, we probably aren't going to have a real productive conversation because there's no way everything's going perfect. So by encouraging people to say, hey, these 5 things are going great. Here's why they're going great. And here's 3 things that aren't going so good. We missed this. We didn't do great on that. But the good news is I got a plan to go fix those things. That's the healthy discussion, not the high five culture where, hey, it's all great. Everything's a highlight. Nothing's bad. We're all good. I'm smart. You're smart. We're great. We're winners. Everybody's getting a trophy. It's all good. That's not going to build that risk-taking culture and the intellectually honest culture where people can feel comfortable saying, I didn't get this right. And I think I made the right decision at the time, but now guess what? We are where we are, and here's my plan to go make it right.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's neat that you're able to create such a transparent way of, to get people to speak up and kind of tell you, and then also like say, hey, this isn't what's going well, and why that's important just as much as what is going well. It sounds to, Dirk, you were overseeing a business that was 4 times the size, or 4x the people. There were obviously clear I'm sure profitability and accountability, but to do that, right, winning people over on that kind of one-to-one level or driving performance, at large. I mean, performance is such a big topic and can be diced and sliced so many ways, but what's your definition of human performance or performance in an organization that, you're walking into and maybe changing order of?
Well, that's probably a complex answer. I think one, obviously performance is the key results that we all align around. That's the simplest thing. Like, what's the score at the end of the day say, right? What is the scoreboard? We've set out to win. We got 10 points. The other team got 5 points. We won. So therefore, performance is good. But I think I'd look at this, certainly in a growing organization. Um, how is the talent below you performing? What was their contribution? How did the full team dynamic contribute to the results, right? Again, it's not a monarchy. Yeah, we hit our booking target for the quarter. That's great. Performance is a winner. But what was the contribution of that across the team? How did each member of the team contribute to that win? for the quarter booking results. How did you manage or coach up the folks that were at the bottom of that list to get to be a contributor in this quarter? So really digging down around the total team contribution to those results, not just, hey, the quarterback threw the winning pass and therefore, he or she is the MVP. What about the person that made the block or the coach that came up with the play that was, taking advantage of a vulnerability in the defense? I mean, those are all things that I think should be performance indicators as well, because that's going to be indicative of future performance. Hey, we won this game, but guess what? We're going to win the next game because we've got all these things in place. We've got a team that works together. We've got, everybody's contributing their piece to the team, and team members are holding each other accountable, but also helping lift up those that maybe need some additional help or feedback or coaching or enablement.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Um, it's I like what you said too about so recognizing people who like made the block might not be the person who ran the ball into the end zone, but without the block, the run to the end zone would have happened. So I'm sure Saquon Barkley to the Eagles was a lot of that this year. He had a lot of good he had a great offensive line. So
I can relate to this. My son he played high school football and he was a lineman, not the most celebrated position on the team. And, early on in his career, I was, youth football coach. So I was involved in coaching the linemen. And, my son once said to me, he said, you realize the linemen are the only guy in the football team that actually can't see the ball. Like the defenders can see where the ball is, but we got to play with our backs to the ball. So we've got to have a lot of trust in the people behind us. And so, probably an underappreciated position on the football team, but also one that's not inherently the easiest job because you can't even really see what's going on.
it sounds like your son learned a lot of good lessons about that as well as a kid. A good dad to teach him, I'm sure. Uh, Dirk, one of the things, as you're talking about team and culture and performance and kind of fostering of that individual talent, something you love to do. Is there, you've seen a number of companies, you're working with a number of companies, given what you're doing today. Are there any standout stories for you or any kind of, as you look back, last 10, 20 years, that you'd want to share about a particular person in general or, name them or not name them, but about their growth and development and kind of maybe what led to that? Anything that anyone come to mind that might be good to shine a light on?
Yeah, I have the pleasure of working with a founder CEO today. I won't name the company. Um, but he essentially grew up in this business, in his business, right? He was kind of employee number 6, and it was a business his father started, and he inherited and took it to an incredible level beyond whatever he thought it was going to become with, and had a lot of both professional success and economic success. And we came along and made an investment in that business several years ago. And, he was, I guess, evolved enough to say, and YPO guy, maybe that's part of YPO, I don't know. But look, I've taken this business to an incredible place, but I want to partner with you guys to take it to an even better place. And having the foresight to be able to say, I got some of the answers, but I don't have all the answers. And I want to partner with, your firm to help me, was, I think, a great story. And it was this sort of perfect, that balance of humility and also a desire to continue to succeed in areas that, maybe weren't even economically, viable to him. And the business was wildly successful as it was. But I think he had a desire to up his game to another level and to win in a way that wasn't just maybe the economic win, but to also create a business that would endure beyond his leadership.
Mm, yeah. It's probably neat for you to see when people take that evolution and then lead them, help them. Oh, let me ask you a question on that, if you don't mind me. If you can share, great. If you can't, no problem. But sounds like there was maturity. There's an opportunity for you. You saw another level. How much is it that founder CEO saying, "Hey, I've gotten it here, but I could use a lot of help to take it here," versus someone like yourself, given what you've seen across horizontally and vertically on the field, uh, going to that person and approaching them and saying, "Hey, like I can see what you can't see, and I can take you here." Like what's the maybe ratio in terms of that happening?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Because in the role I play today, which is sort of this sage coach, mentor, sometimes you'll walk in, you'll say, "Boy, it's really obvious to me we need to go do A, B, and C." But you have to resist going in and saying, "Oh, it's simple. Just go, throw this pass and do this and do that." You have to be able to sort of coach it in a way that is, "Hey, I remember a time when we had a similar problem, and here's the way I thought about it, and here's the way I did it." And so, the coaching has to become coaching, not telling, right? If we come in and say, "Oh yeah, just go do this and that, and all your problems are going to go away," you're disrespecting the person that created the business and got it where it was. But then you're also sort of minimizing their contribution going forward. So it has to really be collaborative, and a lot of um, ultimately it has to be the leader's decision about what to do with the business, but being able to bring those experiences in and say, "Hey, this reminds me of another case and another scenario where this happened, and here's how I thought about it, and here's what the result was." And then sort of letting them digest that and make their own version of the decision, or make their own decision based on those facts. So I think that's one of the tricky parts about being this sort of executive coach, mentor, or whatever is, and I'm sure, those of us that have spent any time in therapy, sometimes you just look at your therapist and go, "Just tell me, just like, what should I go do?" And, the reality is they're never going to do that because they're good at what they do. They say, "Well, let me tell you another a story about another client who had a similar problem. Here's what they did." And, you got to make the decision for yourself. You can't just have somebody go tell you what to do.
Like a valuable way that you show up for the people that you get in front of, even if you may know the things that you would do, given your experience. Speaking of that, no, you talk about being this sage mentor, kind of, let's say, wise elder on the path in a way.
I'm not that old, Brian. Come on.
I don't want to. Yeah, I knew that was a bit of a stretch, but I'm just trying to compliment maybe the wisdom that you have. So, what would you say is, let's say let's say a imaginary portfolio of founders you were advising, what would you say the number one thing is that you'd be their first call for?
I say, get your team right first. In fact, there was somebody not related to, what I do for a living was asking me for some thoughts, and, I say, get your team right. You're never gonna win a game without having the right team, and that's maybe painful for you because the team that got you to, the divisional playoff may not be the team that's gonna get you to the Super Bowl, and I hate to keep using football analogies, but we kinda went down that rabbit hole, so we'll keep using them. But, um, and not that you change athletes, but you may change your game plan, and, and that may mean you may bring in, maybe you start with a different starting running back as opposed to the one you had before. So I always talk about getting the team right. There's a tool that I use, that's called a 9 box. It's something I use in my day job where it says, who are your high potential people? And it sort of has a performance on one axis and potential on another axis. And, you put people in each of these boxes. Are they high potential, low performance? Are they high performance, low potential? And then there's strategies to kind of coach the team up, for each of those boxes. So getting the team right, right butts, right seats, maybe that involves having to narrow people's responsibility, maybe having to, suggest that somebody, be brought in to replace the role for somebody who got you to, from 0 to $10 million may not be the person to run sales to get you from 10 to $100 million. And in some cases, I've seen this where sometimes the folks are actually relieved, where they're worried that, man, I'm not the right person for this job, but I don't want to let the CEO down. And you say, hey, we'd like to bring in somebody to work with you that's going to help this seeing the business get to $100 million. Sometimes those folks are actually relieved. You think it's going to be a painful conversation, and it can be sometimes, but also sometimes people are like, "Yeah, you're right. I'm really more of a startup guy. I'm the guy to get us from $1 to $5 million."
Yeah, yeah. It's I've definitely seen it as well, where maybe certain people are relieved to kind of shed responsibility and not take it up the hill. But uh, yeah, I can appreciate.
Certainly getting team right. Just to answer your question directly, right butts, right seats, right athletes. And is this the team? If you're trying to get to 100 or $200 million in revenue, is this the right team to get you there?
And then not to inject too much shit, something I love about my partner I brought in about a year and a half ago named Blair. She's scaled multiple software businesses and in the marketing brand, and she's she came in. It's like it's about the team, and it's all about the team, and like she knows how, and so I just love that about her. That she's seen it, and so you're saying it just reinforces the concept. Dirk, in terms of uh, when you're leading organizations, in this advisor, sage type of role, right? It sounds like, from some things I've listened to about you, like there's clear processes to grow a business and create value, um, and lead teams and drive that organizational performance. But how much should, when you think about this, and this is a harder question, but when you think about it, how much is it data process versus instincts? And yeah, obviously instincts are informed by data, but how much is it super black and white based on data and process versus just that gut feeling? And how do you kind of make decisions in that realm?
I think the more mature the company gets, the more the data and the database decision making is relevant. We often joke uh, amongst ourselves in the private equity side because we're buyout investors, and so we invest in more mature software companies. None of us would start these companies because the data would tell us we shouldn't start the company. The data would say, oh, there's a competitor's got 80% market share. We're never going to compete against them. So we'd look at the data, we make a decision never to start the company. And the entrepreneurs are the ones that say, I don't care what the data says. My instincts tell me like this is a great business and that there's opportunity to do this product better, and so I'm gonna do it. And, there's a lot of naysayers that say, "Well, that's stupid, you're competing against a billion-dollar company, like, why would you do that?" And then we come along 5, 6, 10 years later and, "Oh, you're right, they're competing very nicely against the billion-dollar company, like, we should give them more capital to go invest." And then we sort of evolved into this data-driven decision, but the dirty little secret is if you looked at the data early on, you probably would never have started the company.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. It's a great take. I definitely agree on the instincts to kind of get something off the ground, but where you can play and come in and skyrocket a business from there is definitely valuable as well. Dirk, when you look at, let's just say the next, like say 25, 30 years of life, and the things that you want to be doing, where you're spending time with people you want to be spending time with, you're doing the work that, fully that excites you. Like, what does a future Dirk look like? And walk me down that path.
Wow. This could be the one question I may not be able to answer because I think I'm still exploring that. Look, I love working with worthy people that are trying to do amazing things and, add whatever experiences I have to the mix. I'm not sure I need to be, leading a company, although I'm not saying I wouldn't go do that again, but I think, sort of, um doing what I want with people I like to do it with in a way that is allowing me to contribute in a way that I think I have a unique ability to contribute. That's what I want to do, and I think the success will follow by staying true to that.
No, I love that answer, and I want to build on our football analogy. I want to come back to that answer, so I'm going to take you out and come back in. What is your favorite sports team right now?
Well, look, I live in Dallas, Texas, so I'm a glutton to be a Dallas Cowboys football fan. It's been a long and painful 30 years, of being a Dallas Cowboys fan, but the one thing I'll say about Cowboys fans, we are perpetually optimistic. We always think that the next year is the year we're gonna win the Super Bowl.
What I'm not going to ask you is to tell me if you think Dak Prescott is a winner or not. But what I am going to ask you is, if you were in a suite with Jerry, standing next to Jerry Jones, and there was a picture of Dirk that came over the big jumbotron or the big screen, and everyone in the stadium was looking at it. 90, 100,000 people, and maybe your face was in the bottom right corner. But more importantly, what was at the center of the screen was a message. And that message represented you as a guide to all the fans in the stadium. What would that board say? That's not, and this isn't a sports, it's not what would it say to the fans, but what would it be about Dirk and who you are and what you embody and give away in the world?
Oh, okay. I thought you were gonna go down to what would my advice be for Jerry Jones.
No, no, but I'm just giving you the visual of, how you could support, Jerry's development and, the team.
Yeah, so I think, we talked about getting the team right, and I think Jerry would argue he tries to get the team right every year, and I might flip that around and say, "Jerry, the team right may be not the team on the field, but the team between you and the field, and maybe it should be more of a meritocracy and not a monarchy." And, you've earned the right to make it a monarchy, and if that's really what you wanna do, then you should do that. But the legacy of the Dallas Cowboys may be and should be bigger than Jerry Jones, and that's gonna involve, perhaps getting the team between the team on the field and the team you right. A little bit of a proxy for, the general manager argument that everybody says, Jerry should bring in a worthy general manager.
Very interesting. I'm envisioning a book from you that says "Build the Meritocracy, Not the Monarchy."
Maybe, I've wrestled if I wrote a book, what would about that could be the one. That could be the one.
We just did it, and it's this boom. No, that's I appreciate you kind of going down the rabbit hole with me there. Um, Dirk, you seem to be a father of kids who you're proud to see in this world. You talking about being productive, healthy, happy citizens in the world. What was your, just out of curiosity? You talked a lot about your leadership and management style with teams, but would you say that was similar on the home front? Was that different? Like, how do you lead as a father and parent versus within companies?
So this is an area where I'm continuing to learn, where I certainly didn't get it all right. I was off trying to, make my mark in the world, and I allowed or let or encouraged my wife to be the primary figurehead and queen of our household. So this is an area where now that I've had a chance to reflect a little bit, I lost my wife to cancer about 7 or 8 years ago, so I've had to fill a much different role with my kids. In fact, a friend of mine wrote a book called The Dad Advice Project, and I had the pleasure of being asked to contribute to that. It's sort of a collection of short stories, and that was really the basis for my short story in that book is, having to intentionally change my role with my kids as they got older. And, I used to have my lane, which was, I was sort of the breadwinner and the lead enforcer of the rules and all the things that, traditionally a dad would do. And I've had to certainly morph that into much more of a balanced role today. Not as my kids, only have me as their parent, and I had to be very intentional about that. I still don't think I got it right, but I'm working, most days to try to figure out how I can be a dual parent or play a full spectrum of parent to my adult children.
You beautiful answer. Do you mind if I unpack that a little bit?
You go for it.
Okay. Uh, if you could go back, knowing what you know now, maybe reading that book, contributing, kind of seeing the dual parenting role now, if you could go back to maybe when these kids were, when your kids were 3 or 5 or 10, kind of what would you do differently? Like what are the things that you would change or invest in differently in terms of conversations? Kind of what comes to mind?
Yeah, I think I would certainly uh, play less of an enforcer role. I think my wife encouraged me, and I allowed myself to become, sort of the primary arbiter of the rules. And those of us who are parents understand what I'm talking about. For rules, you got to follow the rules. It's kind of the thing. So certainly, I would look to have a more balanced approach to that part of the parenting role. I also think I'd be a little more probably emotionally vulnerable. I talk a lot about being vulnerable to, within a business setting and how are you sort of, "Hey, I don't have the answer here." How do I have the vulnerability to say, like, "We need to come up with the answer because I don't have the answer. Yeah, I'm in charge, but I don't have the answer." And, I think taking that down to parenting is probably an area where we could all do a better job, right? You sort of wanna be mature enough and, convince your kids that you're invincible and that you've got all the answers and that your way is the right way. But I think, being able to come in and saying, maybe the way I was raised as a kid wasn't the right way, and let's figure out what works best for our family and how do we have a discussion about our family values and how we want to, govern our family and operate as a family, and what do we value and how do we want to show up places, and how do we want to be known and respected and all that stuff. And so making that more of a collaborative decision, the same way I do it in a business environment.
Interesting. This is probably terribly wrong to say. I don't mean this in any way. I was going to say monarchy on the home front, but meritocracy in business.
No, that's probably that probably is a great way to, so you've summed it up much better than I ever could.
Maybe that's the book title. We no, we're getting vulnerable here. No, I'm kidding. I'm sure you did the best you could. It's funny. I've had some conversations with my dad over the last few years where he did some reflecting, and it's like you arrive at this point where you're both parents, where it's like you kind of you realize they did the best they could. And then you tell them, and it's like this huge weight off your shoulders. Not that and I think you were doing what you knew how to do to make money and put food on the table, just like most men and how they've grown up. And so, it's neat that you've been able to evolve your relationship with your kids today.
It's an ongoing project. It's honestly
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
back to the humility, and I don't have all the answers. And certainly I spend time with most of the peer groups I'm in, and this is an area where a lot of us spend time talking about how do we be the best parents we can, and how do we not repeat some of the things maybe that were the sins of the past, or the way we were parented. Doesn't mean it was the right way, but it was the way that at that time people thought they were supposed to be parents.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole breaking the cycle. There's a book by Justin Baldoni, even though he's in the news these days, but called Man Enough. And it's really interesting. He talks about his relationship with his father and anyways, all these changes, and it's really powerful. But anyways, thank you for going there.
Yeah.
Closing question. And we talk about anything else if I missed anything, but you talked a lot about kind of your views in business and what you've built and how you've done it and how you've led. Talked about the home front. We talked, a bit about what you stand for, but it seems like you've been, maniacally focused in a good way, like do the things you've done and do them with incredible effort. When you look at, is there anything like you haven't done in the life of Dirk? Like things that you are maybe looking forward to beyond work, beyond this kind of advisor, sage type of world? Like what are the things that you are looking forward to then maybe you just haven't made time for it because you've been so entrenched in, just doing the things in the world that were meant for you?
Yeah, like I spent a lot of time working on the, certainly the for-profit side. I want to very intentionally get involved in the not-for-profit side. So that's part of the give back. How do I find causes and things that I'm passionate about, that my family's passionate about, that we can, focus my time and energy and resources on. So I think, certainly want to spend time on the nonprofit side. I'm also trying to figure out, what are the sort of non-professional accomplishment things I want to do. And, I'm exploring this a little bit. My other half has decided we're going to go run the Paris half marathon next year. And I ran a little bit of cross country in high school, but haven't ran much since then. And, that's a little bit of a physical accomplishment that I've not done. And it's not been an area where I've spent a tremendous amount of time, physically. So, that's an area where I'm looking forward to doing that next year. And we signed up for it. And I got to, start getting out and running every couple of days to get myself in shape to go do that. So there's some physical things. And I'm becoming a little bit enamored with some of the wellness stuff. And maybe that's just my generation. You get to an age and you realize you're not invincible. And, we've grown up in an era where, there's been lots of, maybe not the best foods you've been eating. And, maybe you grew up where, you'd have 2 glasses of wine with dinner. And, so how do you balance the desire to, to enjoy life and good food and good wine and good drink, but also with the wellness and longevity and making sure that you're trying to keep yourself healthy. So probably a passion for longevity and spending a little time in that area as well.
You always move back to San Francisco, and it's a lot of longevity stuff out here. So if Jerry Jones ever just upsets you too much, you have a place.
Right, I can come out become a 49ers fan, I guess, right?
That's right. That's right. in that way. I love that. I love that you're thinking like that, and it's awesome that you're thinking about evolving and changing health and all the things. Dirk, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I mean, you speak so humbly and thoughtfully, and I'm sure you're a gift to work with and for in the professional sense. Is there anything we should touch on that maybe crossed your mind today that we have not touched on, given the chat?
So we as we were sitting here talking about leadership style, I was thinking back on a story, and the fellow's still a good friend of mine and somebody that worked on my team at RealPage. And, when I was getting ready to retire, he made a comment to me about the evolving leadership style that I had, sort of my transformation. He talked about, how do you lead a bigger team, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, never, uh, never try to lead in a way that's not authentic to you. He said, I've seen you at times, you're trying to be a leader that you think you need to be, as opposed to the leader that you are. And it was a real wake up call because I found myself sometimes, you're trying to emulate somebody or you're trying to lead the way you think, like, well, how does Jack Welch lead a company, or how does Steve Jobs lead a company, or, pick whoever your sort of business icon is. And you sort of evolve your style to be more like that person. And he said, It's really obvious you're not being authentic to who you are and the way you lead." He said, "You call it the way you see it, you're a straight shooter." And he goes, "When you try to, be anything other than that, it's miserably obvious that you're trying to be somebody you're not." And so I guess the only, maybe closing advice is, we're all blessed with a certain type of leadership style and the things that are your superpowers, and you should be indulging those and not trying to emulate the style of somebody else.
I love that, the authentic way of leading. And yeah, so I think to just the last point is, if it's so hard for, I'm not saying I have it figured out, but I I think it's so hard for people to even understand who they are in the first place. And that takes a lot of work to peel those layers. And so to even understand how they're leading and if that's the right way or not way, or what's true to them, they might not even know what's true to them, and just how they show up day to day. So and then you even think about it too, like when you build a company, like you're probably building it from a place of pain or to prove someone or instinctually, and like you build around the shell of that's, it doesn't always give off the best stuff. So anyways, I think it's powerful work, and if you can enable people down that journey, I'm sure they're going to leave better than when they came in. So yeah, thank you for sharing. So, well, Dirk, this was beautiful. Truly, truly a nice conversation. Where can people find Dirk, reach out, look for thoughts from Dirk?
Well, I'm obviously on LinkedIn, Dirk Wakeham. And what else? Are you looking for?
Yeah, that's great. I mean,
LinkedIn?
LinkedIn's great. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time today. Thanks for making when you're on doing board meetings and all the things, making time for it. And I'm looking forward to following the journey. So
Hey, Brian, happy to do it. Thanks for letting me talk a little bit today. I appreciate it.
yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for joining me for this powerful conversation with Dirk Wakeham. What stood out most was Dirk's clarity, not just in building businesses, but in how he leads with integrity, how he parents with presence, and how he continues to ask the hard questions of himself. From building teams that outperform to letting go of roles that no longer fit, Dirk reminds us that leadership isn't about control. It's about alignment, growth, and trust. If this episode moved you, feel free to share it or leave a review. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday, and I'd love for you to keep following along. Until next time, stay true to who you are and lead from there.